started here. Anybody need a handout? We are on the parable of the Good Samaritan is where we're at. Got it? Okay. Anybody else need a new one? Please. You got to do that every once in a while. Yep. You got it? Okay. We're on the Good Samaritan. All right. Well, after a 2-week break for the holidays, we're back. And we are coming down to the end of the parable of the Good Samaritan. We're on the back page, is where we're going to start, dealing with purpose and application. So the primary purpose of the parable is seen in Jesus' answer to the lawyer's question. Jesus wanted them to know about the universality of his message and kingdom. So we have a couple of primary lessons out of it. The first one being religion is much more than just simple worship. Now, when I was in college, I had a friend of mine who had a t-shirt. It was a plain black t-shirt with white text on it, so you couldn't miss what it said. And it said, "Reject religion, embrace Jesus." And so I looked at that and I pondered it, and I'm like, I think I like that. But the longer I went along, the less I liked it. Because the issue isn't religion in and of itself, it's how we do it that is the issue. Scripture speaks about pure and undefiled religion. And so religion can be a good thing. Now that t-shirt and the statement on it has permeated our culture. And really to a very deep degree. Here several years ago, Newsweek ran an article, and it was actually a cover story of "Reject the Church, Embrace Jesus." Well, unfortunately, you can't do the first and have the latter. And so, when you get down to it, it's more than just worship. All too often we allow our religious lives to be stifled by ritualism. The priest and the Levite may have been on their way to or from the temple where they served God, but Jesus is saying to us that sometimes our act of worship and ritual must give way to here and now situations. Do you have any idea how many priests and Levites are in the city of Jerusalem at any given time during the services? Anybody want to take a guess? Thousands of them. And when you get to the major feast days, tens of thousands of them. So you have the high priest, ancillary priests, the Levites, who are just the servants because all priests come out of the tribe of Levi. That's why they don't get a big chunk of real estate when Israel is divided up between all the different tribes. They get 6 cities, 3 on each side of the river to operate out of, because they are the shepherds of the nation of Israel. The major difference between the Samaritan and the priest and the Levite is that the Samaritan had a compassionate heart. That's not to say the priest and the Levite were cold, uncaring people, for their whole lives are dedicated to serving God. However, in our service, we must have the proper focus. Sometimes it may be more important for us to be a good neighbor than to take part in a religious rite or a religious ceremony. Those guys could have stopped and helped, and then got into the city and went sorry fellas, I'm out of commission for, however long. I'm ritually unclean because I stopped. But the fact of the matter is the guy was still alive, and being alive, it wouldn't have even messed with him. It was the fear and concern that the brother laying in the ditch was dead. Or at least that's the way it reads to me.
Would it have been a concern that he was a Samaritan? Or not? No, he wasn't a Samaritan.
Yeah.
But they didn't know his...
No, because you're laying there. Yeah, you've been stripped of your clothes and everything. You're basically naked.
Yeah.
I don't know if they would stop and say, what are you or who are you? The dialects are a little different. So probably all he would have to do is speak, and they would know exactly where he was from.
I guess my real question was, since if he wasn't Jewish, would that make him unclean if they helped him even though he was still alive?
No, because there's no law about helping different classes of people. In fact, the Jews and the Samaritans are an interesting group, because out of all of the people living in that geographic area, they're the closest related to each other. On a genetic level, not just a spiritual level. And basically what it goes back to is when the exiles happened, when they carry Israel off into exile, they don't take everybody. You take the upper class, you take the aristocracy, you take, because it is a class system, and the lower classes, most of the time, you leave them behind. So that's what happened with the Samaritans. Israel goes off into exile. There's a remnant that's left. Jerusalem is desolate, so they set up in Samaria and they start worshiping God. But there's not enough of them, so they intermarry with their neighbors. So in the eyes of the Jews, they're dogs, they're half-breeds, and they basically said, we're not dogs and half-breeds, we're the faithful ones. And so it's kind of like the Catholics and the Orthodox. They excommunicate each other and hate each other. But we can even bring that forward to the modern day. There still are Samaritans, but there's actually less than 100 of them left. They are a community that's dying out. But when you talk about relationship to each other, you have the Arabs and the Jews at each other's throat. But genetically speaking, they're cousins. They're family. They're related to each other. And they've spent generations trying to kill each other. I think there's a lesson here. How am I going to treat my neighbor? Thoughts, comments, questions?
I do have a thought that goes back a little farther than this. We were talking about accepting Jesus if it away with religion, but how can you do that? Because you're the church, because the church is Christ's bride.
Yes.
How can
Well,
you do away with it?
you can't. The two are inseparable.
I guess my question was too, how do they say this is okay to do away with the bride and only keep the groom?
Because we have recreated the faith in our own image to make it palatable to us. The church is doing it all over the place. That's why you see a split, if you will, specifically today, between, if you want to call it liberal and conservative churches, and how the mainline denominations are not only dying, but the ones that are left that are still large are splitting. They're fracturing over cultural issues. And those cultural issues also happen to have theological implications. But it's nothing new. It's been going on forever. About every 150 years, you see a major reset on things. And those things that are left-leaning become even more left-leaning. And those things that are conservative tend to carry on from generation to generation. So you're always going to have, like right now, We're into 2024, and I'm reading my first book of the year. And the book is called Christianity and Liberalism. And it was written by J. Gresham Machen back in the 1930s. And I'm reading this book, and I'm like, this is today. And it is the fight between Orthodox Christianity and recreating religion in our own image. So it happens, it happens in every generation. I'm sitting here reading this going, he wrote this in the 1930s, which they had the, if you will, what they called the modernist fundamentalist debate. Can we reject the virgin birth? Can we reject the deity of Christ? Can we reject the death, burial, and resurrection and still call ourselves Christians? Well, that's exactly what the mainline denominations were doing. It's, let's accept the idea of Jesus. Let's turn Jesus into a good teacher. Well, you can't do it. It's one of the things that gets me. I mean, the church has its issues. Every church, every body has its issues from time to time, but it really ticks me off when I see people bashing the bride. It's like the church isn't perfect, but the church is the hope of the world because the church is what points us to Jesus. And this crazy idea that, oh, well, just reject the church, embrace Jesus. Well, the problem is that when you try to embrace Jesus outside of a congregation of believers doing life together, you run a serious risk of creating a Jesus in your own image that isn't the real Jesus. Or what we get today is, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. What a cop-out. Sorry, I'm going to call it what it is. I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. Like, yeah, you're spiritually lazy.
I think the word spiritual is way overused.
Mm-hmm. It's a buzzword that has no meaning anymore.
I don't think we really know what spirituality is.
Well, it's one of those things. It's a term that we define as an individual. And what is spiritual for one may not be spiritual for another. It's that classic relativistic mindset. And I don't want to steal too much from my sermon this morning. But we live in a culture that is way too individualistic. Yes, God created us as individuals. It would be a really dull, boring existence if all of us were identical. But at the same time, we've taken that so far that we've allowed ourselves to redefine faith and redefine Jesus in our image. And I think at the end of the day, it causes more harm than good. And I think it's one of the reasons why we live in a confused society. Because people are looking for truth. People want truth. But when the culture yells back, live your truth, well then, man, I've got to figure out what that is. And it's pragmatic, and it can change from day to day.
Jim, if we looked in the dictionary, what would the definition of religion say?
You know what? It depends what dictionary you use. There's a statement that has been made, and it's very true. Control the language, control the culture. I wouldn't give you 2 cents for a dictionary that was published in the last 25 years. Yeah. I have in my office, amongst all of my books, a very, very large book sitting on one of my cabinets. It's the Webster's Second Dictionary. It's several thousand pages long. In fact, when you close it, it's about that thick. It was published in the 1930s, and it's the primary dictionary that I use because it is around that time period where you see definitions starting to change. Let's redefine everything. I used to want a copy of the Oxford English Dictionary. It's about 25 volumes, the granddaddy of all dictionaries. I wouldn't touch it today with a 10-foot pole because they've changed the words. But religion, a base definition that I would give for religion, and I'll go look it up and get what it says, but religion is a set of beliefs in, basically, if you will, in a power higher than yourself that governs life. with different rituals and things like that involved. But I'll bring it next week. I'll go this week and I'll look it up just to see what it says about it, because you would be surprised. In fact, you want to go a little bit further back and have what in some cases is even a better dictionary. Go back to Noah Webster's original dictionary. Noah Webster was a brilliant man. And his dictionary today shouldn't bear his name because it's an abomination to who he was. Oh, some things they get right, but it's a lot of the cultural things that they change the dictionary definition on, like the definition of marriage, and so on and so forth. Anybody else? Good questions today. All right, number 2. Compassion can be truly seen through the character of one's actions. Love is an invisible thing. One cannot draw a picture of love. One cannot describe its dimension, identify it, or identify its color. The only way that we can demonstrate love is through our actions. Jesus' words are crystal clear. All men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. I find it interesting. If you love one another. Not if you have perfect doctrine. Not if you have perfect understanding. Not if you have perfect ritual. Paul talked about being a clanging cymbal or a banging gong. It's all show. It's all spark and no fire. Or all flash and no fire. I think we miss this in a lot of ways. The churches tend to be two different extremes. And I've said it here multiple times, extremes tend to be unhealthy in any way you look at it. You have the extreme of service on one end, where the gospel, Jesus died to save sinners, is replaced with the social gospel. Let's feed people, let's clothe people, let's house people. And that is what you do to be saved. Then on the other end, you have let's make sure we have the right doctrine. Let's make sure we have the right authority. Let's make sure we get the book right. And we ignore the person that's starving on the street. Both of those are bad. But at the end of the day, all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Because here's the crazy thing. When it comes to interacting with people, if you love them, and if you show them that you love them, they will stick around to hear what you have to say. Now people will say, well, I don't want to help people because I'm going to get taken advantage of. Did you ever notice in the Bible that there's not a statement, only help people if they're not going to take advantage of you? That statement's not in there. You can look all over the place, but you can't find it. Now, do you do your due diligence? Sure, absolutely do your due diligence. But you're not going to know. In the vast majority of the situations, you are not going to know. A lot of our benevolence, at least outside of house, we take care of in-house benevolence in-house because that's what we're supposed to do. But a lot of our community-wide benevolence, we pull together with the other churches and it's run through CAMA. They have a set of guidelines that us local ministers got together and developed years ago for helping people. And it does kind of weed out the people that are going to take advantage of you. But at the end of the day, you have somebody come in, and sometimes they may not hit everything on your list. You're still going to help them anyway. Because at the end of the day, their actions are between them and God. We're not, as I said in the sermon series that I preached on this parable, it's not our place to stop and ask the brother how they ended up in the ditch. That's basically irrelevant. It's stepping up and helping them out of that ditch, regardless of how they got there. Because when it comes to our own salvation, God doesn't ask or point out how stupid we were before he says, come on, I want you to be one of mine.
I have people ask me, how do you know those kids really eat that food? Or how do you know they eat that food? The parents
Yes. Yeah, and that's what you do. Judy here is talking about backpack program. I know, because I've seen kids take those bags, open it up, take out a few things, and throw the nutritious food, if you will, in the trash can. Okay, we don't have any control over that. But I also realize at the same time that there are kids that depend on that food. And it's not a lot of food. And they take it home, and that stretches them for a weekend. And I'm sitting here looking at it going, man, I wish I could double up how much I give them. Regardless of the few that may not take it seriously. Because those that do take it seriously, you know.
You know, it's the same with lunchtime.
Yes.
If you see a little kid, you're like, oh, they're not going to eat that stuff. They clean their plate.
Yes.
They clean their plate every day.
Yep. Well, and I know, and I think every school's different, but I think of the school district that my mother-in-law used to work in. Like 98% of the kids in that school district lived below the poverty line. I mean, it was a very hard-hit economic area. And they kept peanut butter jelly and loaves of bread stashed in the kitchen.
I would have teachers call when I.
Yeah.
They would call me and say, if I send a child down, will you give them something to eat?
Something to eat. Yep. And that's basically, well, that's basically what it was for. It was, hey, Johnny came to school and he hasn't had anything to eat since lunch yesterday. Well, what kid's going to be able to focus on school when they're starving? So you go down and make them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and you know, and here, I'll tell you, I'll never not give people food. You know, you don't just dole out money, but if someone comes in and says, I need food, let's go into Save-A-Lot, we'll get you some food. So, and you don't do it so people notice that you're doing it. I did have one day where I had a call where a family needed food and they didn't have transportation. And so I went in to Save-A-Lot and I went shopping for them. And I did have a lady, there was a lady from the Methodist church that I know real well. She's like, you're shopping for somebody that needs food, aren't you? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, I thought so. But you don't put it out there. It's not for you to get, you know, accolades for. But it's a fact of life. And Jesus said, you're always going to have the poor with you. Because there's no economic system in the world that will make people unpoor in certain contexts. We're always going to deal with it. The Samaritan clearly demonstrated Jesus' lesson in this parable through his total and unconditional love for the stranger. No matter that the wounded man may have acted unwisely in going to where he should not have gone, no matter that the wounded man was in most likelihood one who hated the Samaritan. I'm going to stop right there. If this guy is a Jew, which we think he is, and the Jews hate Samaritans, and this Samaritan is there helping this guy who evidently is hurt to the point that he's not going to complain about the help, I wonder how it changed his attitude. I wonder how it changed his perspective. Stories told several years ago, Peter Arnett was was a news anchor for CNN. He traveled all over the world. In fact, if you watch the first Gulf War on CNN, he was held up in a hotel room in Baghdad. This guy's traveled all over the world to report on the news. He's in Israel during what I think was the first Intifada. Bombs are going off, rockets are being shot. It's a particularly bloody day. And a man runs up to a taxi cab carrying a small child. This child is bloodied and bruised and injured very badly. jumps in the taxi, take me to the hospital. And the driver just figured that it was, judging by the age of the man and the age of the child, the man's granddaughter. So he questions, I go, we'll get you to take care of your granddaughter. He says, no, not my granddaughter. I'm a Jew. She's an Arab. And his point was basically, I've never been a man of really deep faith, but you see things like that, and it changes you. He was in need, and the Samaritan responded. Christianity can really be seen when our actions cross over our boundaries of race, culture, class, and economic standards. We've got to get past this idea, and I think here at Lane we do a really good job of it, that only certain people are worthy of our attention, that only certain people are worthy of our help, that are worthy of our love and our respect. I've seen it in churches, and it turns your stomach. One of the things I love about being in Lane is I haven't seen it here. Oh, if it's happened, maybe behind the scenes, but not what I see on a daily basis. Can we always do better? Sure we can. You know, I've often asked, what do you do when somebody walks into your church and you can tell that they're alone, they're kind of disheveled, maybe they haven't showered in a few days? How do we respond to them? Or you have somebody that comes in and they're got long, stringy, oily hair, and they're covered with tattoos, and they reek of cigarettes and maybe alcohol. How do you respond to them? Or in our culture today, how do you respond to a couple that walks into your church, and it's apparent that they're a couple, but they're of the same gender? How do you respond to them? Those are always the questions that we have to be ready to answer. You love them, but you tell them the truth. Because that's part of love. It's very unloving to pretend that things are all right when it's most certainly not. That's delusional. And delusional perspectives are deadly. It should also be pointed out that this parable gives us a clear understanding of the concept of love. Our society is enamored with the idea of love, yet has absolutely no understanding of the word. Society identifies love as either sex or those warm fuzzies that you feel on the inside. Are those part of love? Sure. But you can't define the part as the whole. Oh, that works in some things, but not in this. The aspect is not the whole. Love is all-encompassing. In fact, someone asked me to define love once, and this is the definition that I've been working under for multiple years now. Love, doing what is in the other person's interest, regardless of how they respond, or regardless of how they reciprocate. I may not like what you're doing. I may not even like you very much as a person because of what you're doing. But I'm going to love you. I told my son once, I love you, but I'm not liking you very much right now. Which of course he kind of freaked out. Daddy said he didn't like me. And Mom reminded him, no, it's because of what you're doing. Dad's always going to love you. That way it is with people. Always doing what is in their best interest, regardless of how they respond, whether they reciprocate it or not. It's like, well, it's hard to love that person because they never return it. They may never return it. And you can love someone and not have an active relationship with them. It's, I love you, I'm going to do what's best for you, but it's not healthy for us to be in a relationship right now. While there is indeed a physical and emotional aspect to love, At its very core, love is commitment to another person to do what is in their best interest, perhaps even when they might not see it as such. I don't know how many people have sat in my office and said, my parents loved me, and I wouldn't embrace it because I was too stuck in my own ways. And years later, they come to understand it. Sometimes while there's times to make amends, other times when there's not. It goes kind of back to that proverb, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. Doesn't mean that when they're young, they're not going to do stupid stuff. Because that's, I think, all the way that we go. You know, as the parent of a teenager, I realize how much I don't know, at least in his eyes. But now as he's even getting a little bit older, there are times where it's like, yeah, Dad's not as dumb as you think he is. And I hope to get smarter in his eyes as the years go by. Oh yeah, no, because all of you that are parents and grandparents, you understand exactly how that works. And I knew it was coming. But I'm still going to love him anyway. Because that's the way parents do. So, thoughts, questions, observations before we get into the last part of it here. Anybody? All right. The life lesson. I can still remember the first time I ever preached on this parable. The study beforehand changed my life. And I will exaggerate not when I make that statement. It did. In fact, Dawn was there the first time I preached through it. It was when I lived at D-Land. It changed my life. At the core of the sermon were the 3 rules for life. Where these observations originated, I don't have any idea, but the insight's worth sharing. And when I say I don't know where they came from, it's because almost every commentary that I looked at had these, and not a single one of them had the reference for where they came from. Borrow from one, it's plagiarism. Borrow from many, it's research, I guess. The iron rule. This rule is illustrated by the actions of the robber who attacked the man. His rule was, might makes right. This rule is lived out by many in our world, saying, what's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it from you. The ends justify the means. What you own is not mine, but I want it. And I'm going to do what is in my power to make it my possession. Silver rule, illustrated by the actions of the priest and the Levite. This rule is illustrated by the priest and the Levite. They did nothing constructive nor destructive. They were apathetic. Apathy in our world is completely legal. We do not have to care about another person. There are no Good Samaritan laws on the books, at least in most places. You see somebody in need of help, you see somebody hurting, even at times you see somebody injured. There is no requirement to stop and help. Apathy is legal, and in some cases, apathy can be lethal. How apathetic are we to certain things? Oh man, our culture gives us so many reasons to be apathetic. Well, I can't do any good anyway. What can I do? I can't change the world. Yeah, there were 12 guys that followed Jesus that thought the same thing. And look what they were able to do. A waterfall starts with a single drop of water. This rule is also lived out by man in the world today, saying what's mine is mine and I'm going to keep it. We throw up our walls around us, both physically and also just in our own minds. Not saying that walls are never necessary, fences are never necessary. I grew up on a farm. Good fences keep good neighbors. But that doesn't apply to people in need. They're worried about how am I going to feed my family. Now on the other end of that, while there are responsibilities of us to help the stranger, to help those that are in need, there is also an equal responsibility of those individuals to abide by the laws of the land of which they are visiting. You can't have one end doing what needs to be done and the other end refusing to do so. Both are required if things are going to function appropriately. Or I should say, if they're going to function in a way that works. And then you have the golden rule. This is the rule illustrated by the actions of the Samaritan. His rule was, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This rule is lived out by scarce few in our society today. Though at its heart it says, what's mine is yours and I'm going to give it to you. You know, the world likes to bash on religious people. The world likes to bash on people of faith. Here a few years ago, actually been several years ago now, when Haiti was hit by that massive earthquake that pretty much just leveled the country, everybody wanted to help. And a lot of people helped. A lot of people got rich off of it too. But I remember watching an interview with Sean Penn, the actor, who thinks of himself, and I think tries, to live a life of a humanitarian. And the world that he lives in, his culture, his people, don't like Christians. But when he was interviewed, he says, you know, I have to say this. The work that's getting done, the good things that are getting done, the vast majority of it is in the hands of the Christians. You don't have to look very far. Surveys have been done. Religious people give far more to charity than non-religious people. There are also three attitudes of life that appear in this parable. Which one do you operate under? The politician's attitude? What can I get out of the situation? The shirker's attitude? How can I stay out of the situation? And the Christian's attitude? What can I do to help in the situation? What attitude are we going to take? Because let me tell you, this is huge in our world today. The world is in chaos. But you know what? That's nothing new. The world has always been in chaos. We just happen to see it more now because we live in a society that has a twin set of ills. A 24-hour news cycle and a news apparatus that seeks out bad news, and if bad news can't be found, they create it. But it's always been there. The issue isn't how it got there. The issue isn't why it's there. The issue in the end is, what are we going to do about it? Thoughts, comments, questions? Yeah, Judy.
Every time I've looked up today, the dove things up there that they need food. Can the Sunday school class fill that red wagon?
Oh, I'm sure we can. In fact, I met here a couple of weeks ago. I was actually at the courthouse for a hearing for somebody, and it just so happened that the new lady in there at Dove was there too, in the same courtroom that I was in, for the same reason. And when she found out that I was the minister at Lane. And she's like, I love your church. I love your church. And she also pointed out that she loves Lloyd too. Because Lloyd's our messenger. But I told her, I said, yeah, I said, we do it. And I said, you run into anything where you're short, pick up the phone and we'll do it. But no, I think that's something that we could do, not only as a class, but also as a church, to fill the wagon. Because I know there are times, especially towards the end of the month, where they get a little light on stuff. Because, I mean, yeah, you have the neighborhood care center, you have them. They hit different groups of people.
And their number is going up all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So we need to put stuff in that wagon next time.
Yep. All right. So there's the challenge for us. Let's fill the wagon. Anybody else? Thoughts? Comments? All right. Well, we will call that good. And we will start on the next one next week.